It is now in order to consider amendment number 29, printed in Part B of House Report 118-261. For what purposes does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 29, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-261, offered by Mr. Grothman of Wisconsin.
Pursuant to House Resolution 838, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin.
This amendment would increase and decrease the office of the Chief Human Capital Officer at the Department of Housing and Urban Development to express concern regarding the inherently divisive nature of the Diversity Council and the associated race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation-based affinity or employee research groups. Right now, HUD has several different employee affinity groups for different racial, ethnic, gender, or sexual orientations. These groups include Blacks in Government for African American HUD employees, HUD AANHPI for Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander, HUD FEQ for LGBT employees. The so-called Diversity Council is reflected on this administration's drive to divide America. In other words, we should go to work every day, and Hispanic employees should be in one room and talk about what they have in common, and black people should be in another room and talk what they have in common, and the gay people should be in another room and talk about what they have in common. And on the face of it, it's a little bit ridiculous. It's divisive by its nature, as is, I think, so much of the affirmative action mania that's taken over this country. A growing volume of research demonstrates that professional development programs and other trainings in DEI are abject failures. There was a piece in the New York Times with author Jesse Singal comparing different DEI interventions and noted racial affinity groups, a popular intervention in which participants are temporarily separated by race so they can talk about race, have perhaps proved even more problematic. They sparked complaints, such as in Jacksonville, Florida, where a principal was temporarily assigned after she attempted to separate white students from students of color. But in any event, the purpose of the groups is to tell people, because your great-grandfather grandfather came from Cuba, we're going to put you with these other people, and you're supposed to share something in common with these people. In other words, people are labeled as being different by their race or by their gender, which on the face of it is such a racist and sexist thing to do. In any event, I think HUD should focus on its, well, I'm not sure we should have a HUD, but if we're going to have a HUD, it should focus on its goals of providing housing or making sure we have affordable housing for the country, not set aside in groups of people who come from wildly different backgrounds and telling them because you're a Pacific Islander or you're Hispanic or you're black, you should think in a certain way. And I talked to an employee who has to put up with one of these groups in private business, and that's exactly what they are. They have some expert diversity person telling people that because you're black, you should think such and such a way, and because your grandfather's from Cuba, you should think such and such a way, and because your grandmother's from Korea, you should think such and such a way. It's just anti-American across the board. Thank you. I reserve the remainder of my time.
The gentleman from Wisconsin reserves. For what purposes does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Can I just point out the absurdity of where we are right now? Let's have two white guys talk about racial equality and equity, but here goes. Instead of focusing on investment in affordable housing and the safe, efficient transportation infrastructure that powers our economy, we are discussing several harmful anti-equality amendments that have no place in this bill and are frankly a distraction. The Diversity Council and related groups that my colleague objects to include several affinity and employee resource groups that provide opportunities, resources, advocacy for fairness, and peer support for HUD employees that are part of a historically marginalized and underrepresented groups such as people with disabilities, women, and veterans. We may not like the fact that those inequalities still exist, but they do. It does no one any good to hear no evil, see no evil, and speak no evil. The existence of these groups is not divisive. Instead, it promotes inclusion. I don't know why some of my Republican colleagues are so afraid of the word equity, or whether I should stand in the way of efforts to ensure that the needs of disabled, women, and veteran employees are met, so they are all treated equally and fairly. It is and always will be a movement toward a more perfect union. There was never anything in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence or anything else you can go down the street and read in another building that tells us that we'll ever have this accomplished. So instead, it's easier to say it's divisive, it's not necessary, it denies truth, it denies history, and that is in itself is destructive. This amendment is unnecessary, it is divisive, offensive, and a deep distraction. I urge my colleagues to vote no.
Gentleman reserve or yield?
I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Illinois yields. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on it. I think the gentleman has kind of a bizarre view of the world and kind of, I don't think, is accurately analyzing what America is today. A pluribus unum out of many one is the way we view America. The idea of we're going to set aside groups, and by the way, when they define members of these groups, if you're 1/4 American Indian or 1/4 Hispanic or 1/4 black, you're considered part of a group. To think that these people all have something in common because of where their grandparents were born, maybe grandparents who've long since died, is a little bit offensive on its face. If you look at how different groups do in this country, by the way, frequently the most economically successful groups, well, the most economically successful today are Asian Americans from India, then from the Philippines. Cubans do better than average American. Like I said, they're kind of bizarrely, for the purpose of identifying people or setting aside these groups, you're going to have people classified by one grandparent supposedly of color, even though nobody under the sun even knew what their ancestry is divisive on its face. And I believe the only reason people keep pushing this garbage is they do want to divide America. And they do want to have people who are perfectly happy Americans walk around and being told, because your grandfather was Native American, because your grandfather was Korean, you know, you are put upon.
Time has expired.
Thank you.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Wisconsin. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purposes does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
I demand a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Wisconsin will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 30, printed in Part 8 of House Report 118.